Hi, my name is Ben Lau. I am a wedding photographer here in New Jersey, and you are listening to the Workflows Photography Podcast.
Brady, I am so happy that we're finally doing this. I feel like we've been talking about this for a while. So we're here, we're doing it. I am very happy to have this conversation. I know that you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to a lot of just photography in general, but of course, you've got so much experience in the photography industry on the business side that there's going to be a lot of little nuggets here for every listener to walk away with. So I'm really excited about what you have to share today.
Very cool. Yeah.
So one thing that I am really bad at is sales. I know that anyone can be trained to do sales. I know that I also don't have a salesy bone in my body to begin with. So when it comes to my own photography work, I don't do, you're going to hate me for saying this, I don't do sales meetings or calls, but I know that you have done that for couples over the many years. Can you tell me more about your workflow when it came to sales calls with your wedding clients?
Yeah. So first off, just a little bit of an intro. So I'm Brady Puryear. I own Blacksmith Print Co, which makes photo albums for photographers. Been doing that for 11 years. Prior to that, I was photographing weddings for 12 years. I photographed a little over 500 weddings. So I have edited.
You know a little bit about what you're talking about.
I know a little bit about it, right? I've been in every scenario, every wedding photographer I've ever thought of. One of my claims to fame is I said, I've shot so many weddings that I've shot at least 30 weddings where we didn't plan for rain and it did rain. Like I've shot just 30 of those, let alone as a whole, right? So so we're talking about kind of a post-sales, like post-wedding workflow. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So really, I think the thing here in terms of workflow for me is we have to think about sales not as something that we convince people of, but as something that people want to do. And it's really more about reciprocity, you giving to someone and then them wanting to give to you in return. The example I always give is, Scott, if I take you out to dinner like 10 times and I always pay, the 11th time you're going to get there 20 minutes earlier, find the server, give them your card, because people don't like to feel like the scales are unbalanced. So if we're doing a good job as photographers, we shouldn't have to sell. We should charge a client a price, exceed expectations far beyond that price to a level where the client is happy to bring that level even with purchases after the wedding. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And so really focusing not so much necessarily on the meeting and the workflow of the meeting, but on the value that you deliver up to it, right? So here's an example of how we increased our sales for post-wedding with stuff that we did beforehand. So we would call the bride, talk with her just about all her favorite things about the groom and how he is and all that kind of stuff. Things that was about their relationship and what really connected them. Then we made sure to focus on that kind of stuff, their engagement photos and their wedding photos. We had the same conversation with the groom. However, we took it a step further and said, would we be able to talk to your parents, right? And so we would start to call parents and say, hey, for the dad, like, hey, tell us a little bit about how you're feeling about walking your daughter down the aisle. And he's like, man, I'm going to be nervous and all this kind of stuff. And then we would pitch like a father-daughter first look, right? And I said, what's nice is sometimes we do these father-daughter first looks. They're really great. They're a lot of fun. It's just a special moment for the two of you. And you can kind of dump some of that adrenaline, that pre-walk down the aisle adrenaline, have a nice moment with the two of you. And then we find people can just kind of walk them down the aisle a little more calmly. Is that something you might be interested in? And the dads would be like, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. I'm sure, my daughter would love that. So then we'd put that into the schedule months ahead of time. So on the post side, like the client's going to love it. They're going to love that we set that up. They're going to love that we talk to their dad. And then when it comes time to, pick images, you don't think they're going to make an entire spread out of the father-daughter first look? Of course they are.
Of course they are. Yeah.
And so we're not shooting it exclusively for the spread in terms of like our intentions. It's a byproduct of when we do more work for our customers and create more value for our customers. there's more valuable things that got photographed, and that's more that they want to add to the product on the end of the process. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
So
totally.
like someone would spend more money with you because you did that. Scott, you wouldn't have to do any more sales, right?
Right.
You would just be like, oh, how could I go a step further here? And I mean, we went far with this. Like we had a client whose parents that we wanted to talk to, and the mom only spoke German. So I went on Upwork and I hired a translator, and I talked to the mom and said, hey, tell me a bit about some of the moments that you're looking forward to the most, and what are the parts that you love about your relationship with your daughter the most, and what would be like the most important things for us to capture just from a relationship standpoint of view, not a shot list. We got the shot list under control, right? And have that conversation. Well, then that became a huge thing, I got to kind of say hi a little bit to the mom on the wedding day, and then the bride's telling the coordinator, like, oh my gosh, like Brady like hired a translator to talk to my mom to ask her what was important about our wedding. And the coordinator's like, what? So then all of a sudden, vendor wide, I become known as the kind of person that goes way above and beyond for my clients.
Yeah.
That leads to a lot of other referrals as well, right? And so some of the workflow side of this thing, where people spend more money with you, people refer you more business, it's not all just like lead driven, ticky tacky, spend money. There's parts to that. But really, when you just give a ton of value, you get stuff back. Now, on the actual workflow side, post-wedding, we would do a slideshow, and then we would start to build the album with the client from scratch. The key difference there is a couple of things. Oh, sorry, the last one is per image. So let's say we're pre-designing. Well, now we've got to finish the wedding. Then we've got to find time to pre-design a book, and then things get delayed from there, right? But if we can just design with the client, then all of a sudden, as soon as the wedding's being done, edited, and if you're using Imagen, hopefully very quickly, then you can just schedule that meeting closer to when the event actually happened, and excitement is still high, right? Show them all the photos. You're going to build it together, so you have zero to pre-design. And then the reason that we like per image is that we found in meetings where I would design with clients and bring them in the studio, we do this big design. If it was per spread, if the design got to be like at a price point that was, they just chose a ton of photos and had like a really big upgrade, and it was outside of their budget. When they went to cut, they didn't want to cut photos. So then it was like, well, can we take these 8 images and these 4 images and put them on a spread together and cut a spread to save money and just put 12 images on one page? And I'm like, well, that's going to look terrible.
Yes,
and the client's like, well, I don't care if it looks terrible because I don't want to cut out this photo of my grandma. And now we're having a debate with our customer about what is appealing aesthetically and what they don't want to cut memory wise from their wedding. That's not a debate I want to be in, right?
Right.
And so if we just build it up and then it's per photo and it's too expensive and now we need to cut, then we can just cut images, Hey, look, you got 3 dress photos here. Let's get rid of 2 of those. And it's easy. So then your build and your revisions process is much faster. The other thing I'll say from being on the print side now, owning the album company for 11 years, is every once in a while we do get emails from angry brides, right?
You do, as the printer?
Yes, right?
Really?
They're mad at their photographer. The reason they're mad at their photographer is because their photographer has chosen to do it the first way, right? Now, some of our clients do this. It works super well for them. And if it's working well for you, great, awesome. You've got great communication. You've got good customers. But I have other clients who are also good at that. And still, eventually, they run into this issue, which is they get a client. They explain everything to them. Look, your album's got this. They do pre-design, which I don't like. They do a big pre-design, 50 spread, 60 spread book or something like that, right? Present it to the client. The client falls in love with it. Then they tell them that to upgrade it to the dream album is going to be $4,000, $6,000. Now they told them all of that ahead of time. Hey, look, I'm going to design a bigger book than what was included. Well, and you understand that. And they go, yes, we understand that. However, then when they get presented with it and they're in love with it and they don't feel like they can cut it, and then the price point is too high, some people's reaction to that is just like, oh, this is a bait and switch situation that I'm in.
Right.
And they're using my wedding photos to do it to me. And they email us like, our photographers trying to F us, and can't we just buy the album directly from you? And then I explain to them like, no, you can't. Also, we don't do design, so you'd have to spend hundreds of dollars on design software and all these other things. You wouldn't actually save any money by going around your photographer. And also, regardless, we wouldn't sell to you anyway, right?
Right.
In the situation where you don't do pre-design and you just show them all their photos and then design the album with them, if it gets really big, who made it big? They did.
Yeah.
Right. So then at that point, if they told, hey, look, you've got 60 images included, we're going to go ahead and build, see where we land, and then they do 160, they're the ones that built it 100 images over, not you. Right.
Yeah.
You didn't.
And then at that point, they're going to feel so invested.
That one. Yeah.
Yeah. They're going to feel so invested in their picks.
What's that?
They're going to feel so invested in their picks, their selections, that they're not going to want to remove.
Process, you know?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, they'll never feel like you created this huge thing and presented it to them. Like they're the ones that chose it, right? They're like, I want this, I want this. And you're like, okay,
yeah,
cool. Like, you know how many you have included, right? So I find for revisions purposes, that per spread works better. Also, too, if you do retouching, you know, your cost is per image. So if you have 10 images on a page and you got to retouch 10 of them, that's going to cost more money than if you have one image on a page, right? And so I think tying what you charge to what your costs are is smart. But more so for the revisions process, not getting into the consolidation of spreads to save money situation is good for workflow, speeds up the thing. And then also, too, why would you spend all your time designing an album that then you're just going to go and end up redesigning with the client and potentially upsetting them? So those are my kind of post-wedding workflow tips, which is create the value up front so that they feel like, oh my gosh, Scott, you have just absolutely killed it for us. Like, how could we ever repay you? You've done such a great job and go so far above and beyond what we could have asked for. If they go in with that mindset after they've seen their photos, they're going to be completely happy to spend money. You're not going to have to like pitch them anything.
Yeah.
That's number one. And then the next couple are just, you know, if you're going to do a consult where you design with your client, don't waste your time doing pre-design. It's not to your benefit anyway. Design with your customer and, you know, charge per image so you don't get into the whole consolidation thing. Those are my tips.
Let me ask you something. So designing with your client, are you still using the same, you know, one of the 5 or whatever album design softwares that are, you know, available to all of us as photographers? Are you still using that in front of your client, knowing that they all have the easy button? Or are you using something else to design the album that's more of a manual process to, like, what does that look like? And, you know, whether you want to drop the name of the software that you have always used or not, doesn't matter to me.
I mean, I've used all the softwares. You know, I started shooting weddings in 2007. And so in the beginning, it was just smart object templates in Photoshop, right?
Right.
I've used Fundy. I've used Smart Albums with clients as a photographer, both companies. They're both great. They both have who they're right for in certain circumstances. But yeah, I designed right with the client, just drag and drop stuff right in front of them. We're in screen sharing, right? Hey, these 3 on a spread, drag, drop, boom, right?
Yep.
Now, what you're mentioning is more recently where everything's been automated.
Yep.
And funny enough, I hadn't done an IPS session in a couple of years. And I had a client, or I had a friend reach out who I went to high school with and said, hey, you know, you have an album company. My photographer doesn't order albums. And they said I could design one of my own. Can I buy one from you? I was like, sure. So we did an IPS session like just a couple months ago. I didn't shoot the wedding. And I sold him the album for $1,800, something like that.
Nice.
And yeah, you know, good design meeting. But what we did and what I like to do now is go through and rather than pick a few images and drag them up and see that design and then maybe make adjustments there and then go to the next images, we just go through all the photos. Hey, here's how we're going to design bride getting ready details, bride getting ready candids, right? And so on and so forth. And so, these few. And we go and we pick images that'll fit all these spreads and scenes throughout the day. And then, I just clicked auto design right in front of the client. I said, cool. So now that we've picked everything, what's awesome about this software is it'll just go boom and just design from here. Yeah. And then from there, we can just go in and tweak spreads. Hey, you know, we want this one to be a little bit bigger. And it makes it faster. But I mean, when you, especially, not in this scenario, but in others where they're seeing all their photos for the first time in this meeting as well. And, you could send them beforehand or show them in this meeting. I'm delivering images so quickly post-wedding. It's just, you do both at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just one of these things where people are worried that like, oh, but that was so easy. Like, what am I being charged for? But in their minds, they're paying for the photography.
Yeah.
And then like, if you've seen the book, like they're not assuming that this thing's going to be free or cheap. Right.
Right.
And so, I, at least in the experiences that I've had, and then also how I know some other folks do IPS, we actually work with a company called Storybook Design Co. And they do outsource IPS, right? And so let's say you're Scott, you're a photographer, you said you're not salesy, you don't have a sales bone, and you don't want to do these IPS meetings, but you want to make money from products. They will come in and do the meetings for you, and then it's a commission split, right?
Yeah. Hey, Nate.
Hey, what up, Nate? Yeah, Nathan. And so that's awesome, because then people who don't feel like they don't want to do that or whatever, or like they have to learn it or learn the meeting schedule and all that stuff, they just come in and like knock it out. It's like a whole stream of passive income for your business. You just add on products, have them do the sales, and it's over, right?
Yeah.
So everybody has their little bit different way that they do it, but yeah, I would say at the end of the day, you got to think about what's right for your studio and design. Me, I love doing sales. I love being on calls with clients. I love doing Zooms. This is like where I thrive.
Yeah.
I don't.
The first thing I feel like when we first met, the first thing I recognized about you and learned about you is that you absolutely love the sales aspect, the business aspect, the marketing aspect. Like that's your jam without a doubt. It's like so obvious.
Yeah, I mean, it's the people side of the business.
Yeah.
That's what drew me to weddings specifically. Like I actually, as a photographer, I never had any interest in shooting pictures that didn't have people in them, right? So it's like, don't really care for landscape photos. There's nothing of interest. If you see like a big skyline or whatever, I'm like, if there's just a silhouette of a couple on it, that would be so much more interesting to me. But I'm a hardcore extrovert. I'm a big people person. Yeah. And sales for me is just finding out what people, business is just solving problems, right? Yeah. The better you solve the problem, the more people want to spend with you. And so if I can just sit down with a couple and figure out like what they really want from their photos, which is interesting to me because I'm an extrovert, people are interesting. I want to hear their stories. And then I can give that back to them. Then that's my job. I'm done. I get to hang out with people. I got to go photograph. I mean, really weddings are parties. You got an hour of getting ready. Your ceremonies these days are like 20 minutes, unless it's some like super long Catholic wedding. And then you got family pictures for a little while, maybe an hour or something like that, and bride and groom portraits, which are fun because you get to play around. Ooh, this idea, that idea, not for family pictures, but for bride and groom portraits, right? Then it's like 5 hours of party.
Fun. Yeah.
I mean, so as an extrovert, like I loved it, and I think that realm probably tailors more to me. And what's interesting is, I definitely like the sales side of it because it's people based. I don't love marketing. Marketing is all about generating awareness and building funnels, and like it's a lot of back end funnel building strategic stuff. It's not so like me and Scott are chatting and I'm telling him why I started Blacksmith and why I think for the certain type of person like our company would be a great fit. And if he agrees, we'd love to work with him. And if not, that's totally cool. There's a bunch of other great products out there, right?
I think there's more to marketing than just the funnels and whatnot. Like this, what we're doing right now.
Yeah. PR, right?
Yeah. This is part that you still enjoy.
Yes.
But it is part of the market, right? So it depends. But I want to bring up something that before we started recording, you mentioned has been on your mind lately. And it's something that I am most likely guilty of, like many other photographers that are probably listening to this. And I'm actually curious. I'm going to take a guess of saying, and I'm curious what your percentage would be, that it's probably 80 to 85% of the industry is doing what you've been thinking about and want to talk about. That's my guess.
Plus.
You think 95 plus?
Man.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely.
So, enlighten
I've
us.
never even actually seen my side of the argument be presented when the question comes up. That's why I say that. I think
Okay.
95 is actually being generous, you know?
Interesting.
So,
Okay.
yeah, so what's been on my mind recently is that basically we're in a service business.
Yeah.
Right? And there's products tied to it, right? I'm on the product side. And when we start to talk about products, and it's the same for service. So everything I'm going to say goes for service as well. And that includes shooting, post-production, all that kind of stuff, right? People, when they're talking about products, they start to tend to completely stop talking about capacity and efficiency. And it becomes really hardcore about markup and margins, right? So I'm going to give you an example. You see a post in a group. Someone says, hey, you know, I'm starting to sell some products and, you know, how should I price them, right? They don't know. They're looking for advice. They go in a big group and a bunch of people start responding. Some people respond with markups, right? Oh, you got to do at least a 2x markup, or you got to do a 4x markup. And then someone will say, what? I do a 12x markup. Oh, wow, we're impressed, right? And then other people are go, well, it's really about, this is my favorite one, cost of doing business. That's not a financial metric. Cost of doing goods is. Cost of doing business is not. It's just completely made up. However, cost of goods sold. We've got the
spreadsheets.
Right? Cost of goods sold, right? And so say, hey, I try to keep a 25% cost of goods sold or a 40% cost of goods sold absolute max, right? Other people are like, oh, I have 75% margins, right? Someone will chime in and go, I have 90% margins. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, this, do you guys realize this is all arbitrary and doesn't mean anything? And people are like, what do you mean? Like, no, like you have to have these metrics, these numbers. I'm like, no, you don't. Actually, you absolutely don't. And I'll prove it. First off, the idea of markup is crazy, right? The idea that you would take your product and say, I'm going to do a 2x markup, 3x markup, 4x markup, or whatever, especially in this industry, makes zero sense. Let's say you have a $2 print and you're like, I'm going to do a 10x markup. Okay, so you're going to sell an 8x10 for $20. That's decent. You know, it's not great, but it's not bad. But if you took that same 10x markup and said, I have a canvas that's $130. I'm going to charge $1,300 for this canvas, base price. Ooh, good luck selling those canvases, right? Or if you have a $400 album and your starting price for albums is $4,000, it's not really going to work. So then what you end up with is someone saying, well, I have a 10x markup for prints, but I have a 4x markup for canvases, and I have a 2x minimum as a markup for albums, but then this cost per spread or per image, and the whole thing starts to fall apart. It's not an actual structure that you can just like plug in, right?
Right.
Now, an actual structure that you could plug in would be like, okay, regardless of what I sell, I want to have a minimum of, let's say, 25% cost of goods, which 25% cost of goods is basically just 4x markup. It's the same thing. And so the problem with both of these models is that, like I said, their capacity is not part of the conversation. So I'm gonna dispel both of them instantly with a couple examples. Example number one. Let's say I have something that costs me $4,000 and I can sell it for $5,000, and the time that it takes me to do that is 1 hour. Well, wait a minute, Scott. Does that sound like a good deal to you? $1,000 an hour? Absolutely, it sounds like a good deal, right?
It does.
But wait a minute. If it's $4,000, we sell it for $5,000, we have 80% cost of goods, and our margins are only 20%. I don't think the guy with 90% margins is going to like those numbers, right?
Right.
And then also too, if it's $4,000, a 2x markup, which a lot of people says is the base, we'd have to sell it for $8,000. But what if no one will buy it for $8,000? Selling it for $5,000 is what, a 0.25x markup or something like that? Well, who cares? You're making $1,000 an hour, right? I mean, if you work 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, you can make $250,000 working 1 hour a day. That sounds pretty awesome, right? And so when we start to talk about pricing and we start to talk about how much we're going to mark something up or what we want our margins to be, and we just completely throw how long it takes us to do that thing out the window, we lose so much money. We leave so much money on the table. And the second example, which is just a practical example, is like parent albums, right? So your workflow, you schedule a meeting with a client, you watch a slideshow, you design the entire album, you make revisions, you come to a final price. Boom, you're done, right? Now imagine that you could say, hey, look, we have a really killer offer for parents. And let's just pretend on that parent offer for those parent albums, you only make like $150. And that after they've done all the upgrades, that your cost of goods on those parent albums are like 90%, let's just say, right? So there's only a 10% margin, right? But you're making $150 per parent album. But you've priced it affordably so that a lot of parents will take up the offer. You didn't make the parent album $5,000, so when everyone says no. So now a lot of parents are taking up the offer, and what's your work side of it? You're ordering your book, you scroll down the page, duplicate copies, yes, quantity, 2, add to cart, checkout.
Yeah.
So now
really
we're making $300 in 10 seconds.
Right.
However, if you go into those groups and talk about pricing the book, pricing the parent book, it's going to be, well, it costs you this much, so this is how much you have to charge for it.
Right.
So that's my first example. I know it's long. Here's my second one. I had a friend once who was using a company, and they had these really gorgeous walnut boxes. We do too. And the walnut boxes were $250, and they were dead set on a 4x markup. They had to mark up everything by 4x. Somebody convinced them, if you don't mark things up 4x, you're going to go broke, right? So they're like, I'm trying to sell these walnut boxes, but my cost is $250, and I have to mark it up 4x, but no one will buy them at $1,000. I'm trying to find a company that sells them for cheaper. Does anyone know of one? And so what I wrote back to this friend was, hey, let's say you could find a company that sold them for $100, right? Then you could sell them for $400. There's your 4x markup. And I'm going to have to get my calculator out for this one. And you would make $300. Here's what you could do. You're already happy with $300 for this amount of work. Because in this scenario, if we found a box that was $100 and we could sell it for $400, you'd be happy with the $300 profit for designing and ordering a walnut box. Well, your current box that's $250, we can just add $300 to that, and you could drop the price from $1,000 to $550 today without even finding a new supplier. And I'm sure you'd sell a lot more of them, and you'd still make exactly the same as if you got a lower cost and marked it up 4x. So if your time is your time, why not just charge $550?
Yeah.
And like, could not grasp it. Just like the 4x had just been beaten into this person's head so much. And so I think whether it's products or the service side of the business, if we're not factoring in the capacity that it takes, and if we're able to increase that capacity significantly and lower the time it takes to deliver, that we can have much more attractive pricing and sell a lot more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. So what would be your recommended steps for anybody who like currently just went with the simple 4x just for the sake of throwing out a number out there, and they want to now, they just listened to what you said, it's making sense, but they don't know how to start over, where to go. Like,
I got you.
What would be step one? Okay.
I got you. Here's step one for everything.
Yeah.
Figure out what you want to get paid for your time.
Mm-hmm.
I actually don't really care whether it is the service side of the business or the product side of the business, because even the product side of the business has work associated with it that takes time. IPS sessions take time. You know, designing a walnut box takes time. It's a small amount of time, but it is some time, right? And if you haven't figured out what you want to make per hour, then you are wildly lost. Now, lawyers have this figured out, right? Lawyers charge good amounts of money per hour.
$2,000, $3,000 an hour.
$250, $1,000, whatever, right? Their whole thing is about billable hours. And these guys make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right? And so photographers, sometimes they get caught up in listening to podcasts where people talk about, you don't want to trade your time for money. Sure, if you own a business with 50 employees, you're a freelance photographer. You're getting paid for your time. That's the plain and simple. You start building a staff, now we can have a different conversation. 99% of you, you're getting paid for your time. It is what it is. that doesn't mean you can't make a ton of money. Lawyers get paid for their time, they make a ton of money. So let's start there. But if you just take that charge for your time approach, it works across all modalities. I'm going to throw something else out there.
Yeah.
If you make $62.50 an hour and you work a 40-hour work week, just a regular work week, that's $120,000 a year. Most photographers don't make $120,000 a year. They might have $120,000 a year in sales, but they don't make $120,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, at least down here in Southern California, and I know the rates are a little bit higher, but photographers usually get paid somewhere between $50 and $75 an hour to second shoot. And I know a lot of photographers who make $50K a year, $60K a year, who won't second shoot. Because they're like, well, I could be shooting for my own business. Well, yeah, sure, if you're booked that day, but if you're not, you could be making like $75 an hour. And they're like, $75 an hour. When I shoot, I make $500 an hour because they do 10-hour weddings for $5,000. And I go, no, you don't. You have to book the client, sign the contract, shoot the engagement session, cull it, edit, deliver it, upload it, pixie set, back it up to your servers, pre-wedding timeline, hire a second shooter, shoot the wedding. I mean, it's 100 hours worth of work. You make $50 an hour, right?
Yeah.
And so people who aren't making $120,000 are also refusing jobs at $62.50 an hour. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They're like, why would I do, we tell people you should do IPS for engagement sessions. The slideshow is like 6 minutes long. The whole consult's maybe an hour, right? And you can make hundreds of dollars, right? 200, 500, 1,000, right? And a lot of people will get into like wedding IPS. Maybe we can even convince them to add on parent albums once we show them it's 10 seconds worth of work for, $100, $200, $300, $2,000 sometimes. But that's one where people are like, I know people have been doing wedding IPS for years that never add the engagement session piece. And I'm like, you already have the customer. They're already right there. It's a super small amount of time. And in my mind, anytime I can make more than $62.50 an hour, I'm making a greater annual hourly revenue than $120.
Yeah.
And that's good pay, right? Now, if you're already making well above that, sure, don't do a meeting unless you can make $100 an hour, $150 an hour, $200 an hour, right? But I would imagine that a lot of people, if you told them, hey, here's a 1-hour meeting where you can make $200, they'd go, not worth my time. And that same person only makes $70,000 as a photographer. Right. So they're just not doing the math. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Speaking of math, so I notoriously suck at math, always have, among other things.
I'm bad too, but I use a calculator.
Yeah, I have to use a calculator.
Yeah.
So have you considered building a tool for Blacksmith and your customers to utilize that allows them to map in all of what they want and then help them build out their markups per product and everything the way that you envision it to be, rather than just a flat markup? Have you considered building a tool to help everybody with that?
You're already back to markups and not time.
I understand. I'm trying to use terminology that I think everybody's used to at this point. But like,
Scott, think about it this way. You do an IPS session, right? Mm-hmm. And what's nice about this session is post-wedding, you meet up with your client, you see all their photos, you design their album, you finish it that day, get it ordered, now you're done. There's no more stuff to do for that client. You don't send them a design and then ask them to, look it over and send revisions, and they don't send those for months, and then they finally do send them, and then you make those changes and send it back, and then they, we don't know what these changes, we might want to go back to something closer to the first design we have, and it's 8 months later, and it's into the next wedding season, and this stuff is still hanging over your head. Pass. Yeah. We don't even want that. So we can fix all that just by doing one of these, right? And in addition, we find that when we design with our client, people spend more money, okay? So it's a win-win situation. Let's say that meeting takes you 3 hours, right? You would want to price your products in a way to where if you thought your time was worth $100 an hour, that you'd walk away on average making $300, right? Now, I made much more than that, right? Because you can never tell how much a client is going to spend. And then also too, everybody has their price bracket, right? So I was starting at $5,700 in like 2017 at the last year that I was shooting, my packages were just $5,700 and $8,200. My clients I could charge them a lot more for the products than, someone who starts at 3,000, right? So I wouldn't say the person that starts at 3,000 should charge the same per image as somebody like me shooting weddings in Malibu and Los Angeles if they're shooting, lower budget weddings in Michigan or something like that, right? Now, would we want to put them in a situation where they did a 3-hour meeting and only made $15? No, because that's terrible hourly rate. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah.
If your average client, I don't like the per spread model, but let's just say your average client in these meetings adds on 10 spreads and you charge $100 a spread, it's $1,000. I mean, if some people spend $0 and some people spend $1,000 and your average is $500 and you're averaging $500 in profit for a 3-hour meeting, you're making like $125 an hour, which is like double $6,250. So you're making the equivalent of like $250,000 a year on an hourly basis. That's good money.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
If you can charge more for it, yeah, by all means, charge more for it. Right? But that's not the problem that we see. The problem that we see is people pricing stuff too high. No one buying it, being confused, asking photographers what they should do. Photographers giving the same advice that they gave them the first time, which is mark it up 4x or 2x or whatever the situation may be, and not thinking to themselves, but wait a minute, I can order these parent albums in 10 seconds. Why do I need to make $800? Why do I need to make $400 per book on something that takes me 10 seconds? And the answer is that you don't. You can factor in how long it takes you to do something into your pricing.
I think that like the reason why I asked that question is just as you said, like photographers all these years have been taught one method pretty much, right?
Sure.
I'm sure there's people who are teaching it the way that you're explaining it right now, but for the most part, they're all taught this one method and they're given the tools to determine their pricing based on this one method. So I guess my question that I asked was, there's probably a tool that could be made to utilize your method to help photographers get started with better pricing based on what they want to make per hour. And just something that like, somebody with your skill set could probably build. Just throwing it out there might be worth.
Maybe. We're not Imagine. We don't have a team of developers, right? We're buying machinery. So a little bit different situation. But yeah, in theory, it's something that you can build. But, the rebuttal that I had to that a second ago was it would vary wildly, right?
Yes, of course.
And even starting price doesn't necessarily need to be a factor. We have clients who start at $3,000 who get an average upgrade of close to $3,000 on the book. So they charge $3,000 for service. People come in, they sit down with them, they spend $2,700 upgrading their book, right? And buying wall art. So, to even create a tool that was based on what your starting price was or what your costs are, like I said, outside of how long it takes you to do it is arbitrary. And how long it takes you to do it can vary wildly. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, yes. That's very
Some
true.
Some people are doing IPS sessions in 90 minutes. Some people are sitting on Zoom with clients for 5 hours or bringing them in the studio and driving there and all that kind of stuff. And it's the same thing for post-production, right? I have a friend of mine who even uses Imagen. And I ask him how long, culling and post-production, all that stuff he spends per wedding. And he says at least 10 hours. I'm like, I never spent 10 hours pre-AI when I was using Adobe Bridge and Photoshop. Right? But he tweaks a lot, right? Now, that's probably down from 20 hours now that he's using AI to get him there, right? But he knows how long it takes him, right? And I know how long it takes me. And so both of us could charge accordingly. And I think at the end of the day, with some of the stuff, we got to force people to use their brains. We got to force people to say, hey, look, no one's buying these walnut boxes at $1,000, right? Could I sell them for half that amount and still make a substantial enough money for my time? And if I think I can, cool, try lowering the price and see how the market responds, right?
Yeah.
If it responds well, let's say you lower them to $300 and all of a sudden every single client buys them. Cool, bump them to $400 next year. Bump them to $500. See what the market can handle. That's how you price things, right? You don't price things just purely based on your cost or what you think you're worth. I mean, that's the number one problem with pricing as a whole is, people say, hey, I don't know what I should charge. I only booked 8 weddings last year, and they go and they post their portfolio in a group, which is irrelevant, the quality of their work. And a bunch of people see the work and their work is super good. And they say, oh my gosh, your work is incredible. Maybe it's better than their work. And so that they then suggest that person should raise their prices. And I go, no. That's not how it works. If I have an apartment complex and it is 100% full with a 6-month waiting list, we're good to raise prices. If you planned on shooting 20 weddings a year and you only booked 8, you are not in a position where you've created enough demand to even fill the schedule at your current pricing.
Yeah.
Raising your prices from there is only going to hurt you.
Yeah.
Right. And so, it's just kind of this like thing that I tend to call well-intentioned bad advice. Right. Which is just like I said, I hope it didn't offend anybody, but in the pricing conversation that the quality of your work is irrelevant. And in that apartment complex example I gave you, most people, when they talk about real estate, they say location, location, location. What are we going to charge for the apartments based on where we're at? But I could show you right there with that example that you could actually charge more aside of location if you have enough demand. And even if you're in the sickest location in the world, if you don't have demand and you're 20% full and 80% vacant, you're probably too expensive, at least for how much marketing you're doing. Right. And so, it just becomes this thing where it's like photographers are doing markups for products or margins for products and not thinking about their time. They're, raising their prices when they're not even filling their schedules. And then they have a crazy slow year and can't figure out why. If iPhones were 50% cheaper, a lot more people would buy them. Right. And if they were twice as much, a lot less people would buy them. It's not super complicated.
When I organically switched my business during the pandemic from like family portraits and headshots to basically only surprise proposals these days, I didn't know what to price the proposal sessions at originally. Nobody was doing it in my area at all. So I went pretty low. And also I have a full-time job, got a family. Like I'm not trying to do it full-time. So like I wasn't out there to get to the $100,000. It'd be nice, like to get to the $100,000 of just proposals. So I started pretty low. And I was booking, doing way too many proposals that I really wanted to do. And good problem to have. I raised the price. My wife's like, "You're never gonna book," and I've got the problem of now. It's like people either are saying, "I'm sorry, it's not what I was looking to spend." Well, you know what? I don't want you as a customer at that point because I want somebody who is going to want to spend what I want to charge, and I know that if they're willing to spend more money up front for the session, they're willing to spend money on the prints afterwards as well. So.
But let's say you raise it to the price where like next year you still wanted to book some, but you book 0. Would you drop it back down?
Not where it was, but yes, I would lower it a bit, probably.
I mean, what if you
not to where it was though? It was too low.
Okay, not to where it was too low. But what I'm saying is, people are happy to just raise price regardless of demand. You raised price because you had the demand, and you technically don't need the money. Right? You've got your full-time job. This is just kind of side cash for you. And so a lot of people, when they're slow, I'm like, well, if you lower your prices, like more people will be able to afford you. They go, I don't want to lower my prices. I said, well, you don't have to do it forever. A lot of people just have prices starting out on their website and then they tailor them per customer. One of the smartest things that one of my buddies does is he has an associate brand. And his main brand, no matter what, he maintains his price on that brand. And then on associate brand, he has a cheaper one. And when budgets go down, right, and less people start booking his main brand and more people start doing his associate brand, he shoots those weddings. You know what I mean? Like he just shoots the associate weddings rather than like, let's say devaluing. I'm putting that in quotes for everybody on the podcast. Devaluing his main brand by raising the price or lowering the price. And so, it's one of these tricky things. Pricing is really emotional for people. They really, really, really want to tie it to their work and the quality of what they think they're putting out and what they quote unquote deserve, And so that's just not how pricing works, unfortunately. When we couldn't get any wood in the United States during COVID, lumber prices shot up 400%.
Yeah.
Pricing is just supply and demand. It's
Right.
It's not anything else other than that.
Yeah.
And so the real message should be for people who want to increase prices across the board is get out there and create a ton of demand.
Yeah.
And once you're swamped and turning away clients, raise your prices and do it again.
Yep. This has been fantastic, Brady. I knew it was going to be going into this, and I'm very glad that we were able to have this discussion. Like it's as we talked about, it's not something that is discussed in this way in the industry almost ever, if not ever. So I'm very glad that you're sharing this.
I'm going to say this 100%, just so people don't think that like I've been doing this the whole time, right? I shot full time for 12 years. I started shooting weddings when I was like 21, 22. I wasn't doing this. I was doing markups. I was doing margins. And what's funny is then I got into this business, which is manufacturing. You better believe so much of what we think about in terms of profitability is tied to capacity, right? If one employee could make 100 books a day, oh my gosh, we'd be drowning in money, right? Because we would have insane amounts of capacity, all being able to be done by one person. We could just take an insane amount of clients, have one employee, and just rake in cash nonstop. And so there's such a huge direct correlation between our productivity and our ability to either make money or lose money in this business. It becomes very apparent how tied capacity is to the equation. It's way less apparent in a photo business, but it's equally relevant. So I don't want to pretend like, oh, I was thinking about capacity nonstop when I was a photographer, right? I wasn't, right? I was trying to be more efficient because I wanted to save time, but I wasn't really putting it together in that way.
It took broadening your business horizon, so to speak, to see a whole nother look at the industry, which I think is a very valuable thing for a lot of people.
Yeah, if anything, I would love to talk one day about like now running a manufacturing business and then going back. How would I run a photo business today with the knowledge that I already have from photographing 500 weddings? And the knowledge that I have now.
That would be a very
those two together.
interesting.
This is a piece of that, but there's a lot of other factors to it.
Oh yeah.
So
So Brady, can you share with all listeners whoever doesn't know who Blacksmith is, where everybody can check out Blacksmith Print Co. and see all the incredible work that you do, and also share you've just expanded a bit beyond just albums, right? So can you share that as well?
You can go to blacksmithprintco.com. We're going to be at WPPI this year. You can see the product there if you're coming. I'm sure us and Imagine can do some fun things there as well. And then, like Scott, you mentioned, so we've been photo albums since 2013. And then October of this year, we launched our wall art division. And so, it's just to kind of solve more problems for photographers that I encountered, right? Which is you find a premium album supplier, and that's awesome. You want to buy albums from them, but then they don't sell wall art, right? So you're buying albums from one company and wall art from another company. And so we want to be able to, for you to, if you do a session and have sales of both wall art and albums to go into one platform, be able to order all that, check out, right? So that's a little bit of what we're working on. We have a lot of stuff we're doing for 2025. It's gonna be a lot of fun. Amazing. And that's it. That's all the pitches, all the promos.
Thank you so much for joining me, Brady, for sharing all the great knowledge with everybody. Definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, man. I hope it was valuable for people. So much of what I hope to do when I chat in these kind of conversations is actually deliver like a practical value. And what I didn't like about the conversation that I've seen before is that I felt like it led people to price stuff in a way that it wouldn't sell or didn't make sense. Like I said, 4x this and 10x that or whatever. And we're creatives. Like we're already confused enough with all this, business nonsense. Like we don't need something that doesn't make sense, And so just trying to bring light to clarity of this kind of situation.
You have been listening to the Workflows Photography Podcast. To hear more from Workflows, to learn more about our guest, and for an exclusive offer for Workflows listeners, please go to workflowspodcast.com. And be sure to subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.